She stepped onto that private jet wearing faded denim and a simple jacket, carrying nothing but a worn backpack. To the man in command, she looked like someone who'd wandered onto the wrong aircraft, someone who couldn't possibly afford to breathe the same air as his passengers. Captain Marcus Dalton took one look at her and made a decision. She didn't belong in his cabin. He didn't ask questions. He didn't check twice. He just ordered her off, his voice sharp with authority, convinced he was protecting the integrity of his operation. But Captain Dalton made one critical mistake. He never looked at the registration documents. He never wondered why this flight was scheduled at the last minute, or why the manifest had been updated an hour before departure. He assumed. And that assumption was about to cost him everything, because the woman he was trying to remove from seat 1A wasn't a stowaway. She wasn't lost. She wasn't confused. She was the person who owned the entire plane. Before we go deeper into this case, take a second and hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. The night was thick over Henderson Executive Airport in Nevada, the kind of desert darkness that swallows sound and makes the world feel smaller. It was nearly 11 p.m., and the private terminal was quiet. No crowds, no TSA agents barking orders. Just the hum of wealth moving silently through the shadows. Parked on the far side of the tarmac sat a Bombardier Global 7500, one of the most advanced long-range business jets in the world. Sleek, powerful, capable of flying nonstop from Las Vegas to Dubai without breaking a sweat. Its exterior was painted midnight black with subtle silver accents along the fuselage, and the tail bore a registration number that, to those who knew, meant serious money. N447EX. Inside the cockpit, Captain Marcus Dalton ran through his checklist with the precision of a man who'd been flying for 30 years. Marcus was 52, broad-shouldered, with silver threading through his dark hair and a jawline that suggested he didn't tolerate mistakes, his own or anyone else's. He'd flown cargo planes in the military, worked his way up through commercial aviation, and finally landed here, the top tier, flying private jets for people whose net worth had more zeros than most people saw in a lifetime. His co-pilot, a younger man named Ryan Chen, sat beside him, fingers moving quickly over the touchscreen displays. "Fuel's at max capacity," Ryan said. "Weather's clear all the way to New York. We're good to go." Marcus grunted, his eyes scanning the instruments. "Passenger status?" "One confirmed. Victoria Harlow. She's the executive assistant to Gerard Langston, tech CEO. Apparently she's running point on some acquisition deal happening tomorrow morning in Manhattan." "Just one passenger?" Marcus frowned. "For a Global 7500? That's a hell of a lot of empty seats." Ryan shrugged. "Rich people don't care about efficiency. They care about availability." Marcus didn't respond. He was already thinking about the flight. Smooth, professional, no issues. That's how he liked it. He ran a tight operation. His reputation in the private charter world was built on discipline, and he wasn't about to let anything compromise that. Then he saw movement outside. Through the cockpit window, a figure emerged from the shadows near the terminal building. A woman. She was walking slowly toward the aircraft, her silhouette barely visible under the dim runway lights. She wore a denim jacket that looked like it had seen better years, dark jeans and sneakers that had lost their white shine long ago. On her shoulder was a canvas backpack, the kind college students carried, not the Louis Vuitton luggage Marcus usually saw rolling up these stairs. Marcus leaned forward, squinting. "Who the hell is that?" Ryan craned his neck to look. "I don't know. Maybe ground crew?" "Ground crew doesn't board through the main cabin," Marcus said, his tone hardening, "and she's not in uniform." The woman reached the base of the air stairs and began climbing, slowly, deliberately, like she belonged there. Marcus unbuckled his harness and stood. "Stay here. I'll handle this," You want me to call security? Not yet. Let me see what this is first. Marcus moved through the narrow galley past the flight attendant, a polished woman named Simone, who was arranging champagne flutes on a silver tray. Simone, did you let someone board? Simone looked up, startled. No, Captain. The passenger list shows only Ms. Harlow, and she hasn't arrived yet. Then who the hell is walking up my stairs? Marcus pushed past her into the main cabin. The interior of the Global 7500 was a masterpiece of design. Ivory leather seats that reclined into full beds, burled walnut paneling, gold-trimmed fixtures, and a carpet so plush it felt like walking on clouds. The lighting was soft, amber, designed to make passengers feel like they'd entered a five-star hotel suite at 45,000 feet. And there, sitting in the forward club seat, the seat reserved for the primary passenger, was the woman in the denim jacket. She'd settled in. Her backpack was on the floor beside her. She was looking out the window, watching the distant lights of Las Vegas shimmer on the horizon. Her expression calm, almost meditative. Marcus felt heat rise in his chest. The disrespect was staggering. "Excuse me," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. The woman turned. Her eyes were dark brown, clear, intelligent. She looked at him without fear, without surprise. Just awareness. "Yes?" she said quietly. Marcus stepped closer, using his height, 6'2", to establish authority. "You're in the wrong place. This is a private charter aircraft. If you're looking for the commercial terminal, it's on the other side of the field." The woman's expression didn't change. "I'm not looking for the commercial terminal, Captain. I'm exactly where I need to be." Marcus let out a short, humorless laugh. "Really? And who exactly are you supposed to be?" "My name is Jordan. I'm on the manifest." "The manifest," Marcus repeated, his voice dripping with condescension. "Lists one passenger, Victoria Harlow, assistant to Gerard Langston. It does not list," he gestured vaguely at her outfit, "whatever this is." Jordan tilted her head slightly, studying him. "I was added to the flight plan an hour ago. Check your tablet." "I don't need to check anything," Marcus snapped. "I know who belongs on this aircraft, and you're not it. This is a Bombardier Global 7500, not a Greyhound bus. You're trespassing on private property." Jordan's hands rested calmly on the armrests. "I assure you, Captain, I'm not trespassing. I need to get to New York tonight. It's urgent. And I need to maintain the integrity of this flight," Marcus shot back. "Now get your bag, get off my plane before I have you escorted off by security." There was a pause. The cabin was silent except for the faint hum of the auxiliary power unit outside. Jordan's calm began to shift, not into anger, but into something sharper, something that made Marcus suddenly uneasy, though he couldn't explain why. "Your plane?" she said softly. "That's right. I'm the pilot in command. That makes this my aircraft." Jordan stood slowly. She wasn't tall, maybe 5'6", but something in the way she moved made Marcus take an involuntary step back. "Captain Dalton," she said, and the fact that she knew his name without him introducing himself sent a cold ripple down his spine. "I'm going to give you one opportunity to check your tablet. If you do, you'll see that I was added to the manifest at 9:47 p.m. tonight. You'll also see that this flight was rescheduled from its original departure time to accommodate my schedule." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I don't care what some clerk typed into a computer. You don't belong here." "Then let me clarify something for you," Jordan said, her voice dropping to a tone that was quiet, but carried the weight of absolute certainty. "This aircraft, Bombardier Global 7500, tail number November 447, Echo X-ray, is not leased. It's privately owned, and the owner is standing right in front of you." Marcus froze. "That's impossible," he said, but his voice had lost its edge. Jordan reached into her backpack and pulled out her phone. She tapped the screen a few times, then turned it toward him. On the display was a document, a registration certificate from the Federal Aviation Administration, and there, in black and white, was the tail number, N447EX. Registered owner, Jordan A. Mitchell, CEO, Skybridge Aviation Holdings. Marcus stared at the screen. His mouth went dry. "I own this plane, Captain," Jordan said calmly. "I own the company that employs you. And, right now, I'm trying very hard to give you the benefit of the doubt. So I'm going to sit back down, and you're going to return to the cockpit, and we're going to take off in 20 minutes. Do you understand?" Marcus didn't move. His mind was racing, trying to piece together what was happening. He'd flown for Skybridge Aviation for 3 years. He'd never met the owner. He'd only dealt with operations managers and dispatch coordinators. The owner was a ghost, a name on paper, not a real person, certainly not a woman in a denim jacket carrying a backpack. Marcus began, but the words wouldn't come. Jordan sat back down, her expression softening just slightly. "It's okay, Captain. Mistakes happen, but they don't have to become disasters. Go back to your cockpit. We'll talk after we land." Marcus stood there for another moment, frozen in humiliation and disbelief. Then slowly he turned and walked back toward the galley. Simone was standing there, her eyes wide. She'd heard everything. "Captain," she whispered, "is that really—" "Don't," Marcus said, his voice hollow. "Just don't." He returned to the cockpit and dropped into his seat. Ryan looked at him, confused. "Everything okay?" Marcus stared straight ahead at the instrument panel. "Start the engines." "What about the woman?" "She's staying. But I thought—" "Just start the damn engines, Ryan." Ryan hesitated, then complied. The twin Rolls-Royce Pearl 700 engines began to spool up, their low whine building into a powerful roar. Marcus sat in silence, his hands gripping the yoke, his mind replaying every word he'd said to Jordan Mitchell, every condescending remark, every assumption. He'd been so sure, and he'd been catastrophically wrong. The Global 7500 lifted smoothly into the Nevada night, climbing through 10,000 feet as the lights of Las Vegas fell away beneath them like scattered diamonds. Inside the cockpit, Marcus Dalton kept his eyes locked on the instruments, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. Ryan sat beside him, occasionally glancing over, clearly wanting to ask questions, but wisely choosing silence. The flight plan called for a cruising altitude of 43,000 feet, high enough to avoid most commercial traffic, smooth enough to make the 5-hour journey to New York feel like floating on silk. But Marcus wasn't thinking about altitude or airspeed. He was thinking about the woman sitting in the cabin behind him, the woman who owned the aircraft, the woman he'd tried to throw off like she was trash. 20 minutes into the flight, the intercom crackled to life. "Captain Dalton!" It was Simone, her voice tight with professionalism, but underlaid with tension. "Ms. Mitchell would like a word with you when you have a moment." Marcus closed his eyes. Of course she would. "Tell her I'll be there shortly," he said. Ryan shot him a look. "You want me to take over?" "No. Keep us on course. I'll handle this." Marcus unbuckled and stood, straightening his uniform jacket. He caught a glimpse of himself in the cockpit door's reflective surface. Silver hair neatly combed, 4 stripes on his shoulders marking him as a captain, a man who'd built his career on precision and authority. But right now, all he felt was small. He stepped into the cabin. Jordan Mitchell was no longer sitting in the forward seat. She'd moved to the conference area, a cluster of 4 leather seats arranged around a polished mahogany table. Her backpack was open beside her, and she had a laptop out, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. The glow of the screen lit her face in the dimmed cabin lighting. She didn't look up when Marcus approached. "You wanted to see me," Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral. Jordan finished typing a sentence, then looked up. Her expression was calm, unreadable. "Sit down, Captain." It wasn't a request. Marcus sat across from her, feeling like a student called into the principal's office. The hum of the engines filled the silence between them. Jordan closed her laptop and folded her hands on the table. "Let me ask you something," she said quietly. "What did you see when I walked onto this plane?" Marcus hesitated. I saw someone who didn't fit the profile of our typical passenger." "And what profile is that?" Marcus swallowed. "High net worth individuals, business executives, people who can afford to charter a Global 7500. "So because I was wearing jeans and carrying a backpack," Jordan said, her tone measured but firm, "you assumed I couldn't possibly belong here." "I was protecting the aircraft," Marcus said, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew how weak they sounded. "From what? From me?" Jordan leaned forward slightly. "Captain, I've been flying on private jets since I was 12 years old. My father started Skybridge Aviation 30 years ago with one leased Cessna Citation. I grew up in hangars. I learned to read flight plans before I learned algebra. And when my father passed away 4 years ago, I took over the company. We now operate a fleet of 18 aircraft across North America. This plane, this exact aircraft, I purchased 2 years ago for $47 million. So when you looked at me and decided I didn't belong, what exactly were you basing that on?" The question hung in the air like a verdict. Marcus felt heat rising in his face. "I made a mistake. Yes, you did. But the mistake wasn't just about me. It was about every assumption you made in that moment. You saw a black woman in casual clothes and decided she couldn't possibly be someone of importance. You didn't ask questions. You didn't check the manifest. You just decided." Marcus looked down at the table. Shame burned in his chest. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "There's no excuse for how I treated you." Jordan was silent for a moment, studying him. Then she said, "Do you know what the hardest part of running this company has been, Captain?" Marcus shook his head. "It's not the financials. It's not the competition. It's not even the regulations." Jordan's voice softened, but the steel beneath it remained. "It's the constant battle to be seen as legitimate. I walk into boardrooms and people assume I'm someone's assistant. I attend industry conferences and men ask me to fetch them coffee. I show up at my own hangars and employees treat me like I'm lost. And the exhausting part, the part that wears you down, is having to prove yourself over and over and over again, just to be given the same baseline respect that someone who looks different gets automatically." Marcus felt the weight of her words settle on him like a stone. "I didn't mean to," he began, but Jordan raised a hand. "I know you didn't mean to. Most people don't. But that's the problem, Captain. Bias doesn't require intent. It just requires assumptions. And assumptions can destroy trust faster than anything else." There was a long pause. Outside the windows, the stars were brilliant against the blackness of space, undimmed by city lights at this altitude. "What happens now?" Marcus asked quietly. Jordan leaned back in her seat. "That depends on you." "I'll resign," Marcus said immediately, "effective when we land. You deserve a crew that respects you." Jordan studied him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she shook her head. "I don't want your resignation, Captain." Marcus blinked. "You don't?" "No. What I want is for you to learn from this. I want you to understand that the way you treated me tonight is the way too many people in positions of authority treat others every single day. And I want you to make sure it never happens again. Not just to me, but to anyone." Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief, exactly. More like possibility. "I will," he said. "I promise you, I will." Jordan nodded. "Good, because here's what's going to happen. When we land in New York, you and I are going to have a longer conversation. We're going to talk about unconscious bias training for all Skybridge crews. We're going to talk about updating our hiring practices to ensure we're building a more diverse team. And we're going to talk about what real professionalism looks like. Because it's not about the clothes someone wears or the car they arrive in. It's about how you treat people when no one is watching." Marcus nodded slowly. "I understand." "I hope you do." Jordan reopened her laptop. "Now go back to your cockpit and fly this plane. We have 3.5 hours left, and I have work to do." Marcus stood, feeling both dismissed and strangely grateful. As he turned to leave, Jordan spoke again. "Captain?" He looked back. "For what it's worth," she said, her expression softening just slightly. "I know you're a good pilot. Your safety record is impeccable. That's why I haven't fired you. But being a good pilot isn't enough if you can't see the people you're serving as people. Remember that." Marcus nodded. "I will. Thank you." He returned to the cockpit, sliding back into his seat. Ryan glanced at him but said nothing. Marcus put on his headset and stared out at the endless night sky. The shame was still there, the embarrassment. But beneath it, something else was growing, a quiet determination to be better, to do better. He'd spent 30 years in the air, but tonight, for the first time, he felt like he was finally beginning to see clearly. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. Meanwhile, in the cabin, Jordan Mitchell returned her focus to the laptop screen in front of her. But her mind wasn't entirely on the spreadsheet she'd been reviewing. Part of her was still processing the confrontation with Captain Dalton. She'd been in situations like this more times than she could count. The assumptions, the dismissals, the moments when someone looked at her and saw only what they expected to see rather than who she actually was. When her father, Robert Mitchell, had started Skybridge Aviation in 1995, it had been a one-man operation. He'd been a mechanic in the Air Force, worked his way up to flight engineer, and eventually saved enough money to lease a small jet and start offering charter services. Jordan had been 8 years old when he took her on her first flight, a short hop from Los Angeles to San Francisco to deliver a corporate executive to a meeting. She still remembered sitting in the co-pilot's seat, her feet dangling above the rudder pedals, watching her father's hands move confidently over the controls. He'd looked over at her and said, "Jordan, baby, remember this. The sky doesn't care what you look like or where you came from. It only cares if you respect it. Treat it right, and it'll take you anywhere." That philosophy had shaped everything. Her father had built Skybridge on the principle that aviation should be accessible to anyone with the skill and the dream. He'd hired pilots and crew members from unconventional backgrounds, women, minorities, people who'd been overlooked by the major airlines. And he'd taught Jordan that true leadership meant seeing potential where others saw only obstacles. When Robert Mitchell died suddenly of a heart attack at 62, Jordan had been 28 years old, fresh out of business school, and terrified. The company had 15 aircraft by then, annual revenues in the tens of millions, and a reputation for reliability in an industry where reputation was everything. The board of directors had assumed she'd sell. Several had quietly suggested it would be the smart move. Cash out, move on, let someone with more experience take the helm. Jordan had fired 3 of them in her first week as CEO. The others had gotten the message. Since then, she'd grown the company to 18 aircraft, expanded into international routes, and secured contracts with some of the largest corporations in North America. But none of it had come easy. Every contract negotiation, every board meeting, Every conversation with lenders and investors had required her to prove herself twice as hard as any man in her position would have to. And she was tired. Not tired of the work. She loved the work. But tired of the constant battle to simply be recognized as competent. Tonight, with Captain Dalton, that exhaustion had crystallized into something sharper. She could have fired him on the spot. She could have made an example of him, sent a message to every employee in the company that disrespect would not be tolerated. But she'd chosen differently, because firing him would have been easy. Teaching him, genuinely changing the way he saw the world, that was harder. That required patience, faith, the belief that people could grow if given the chance. Jordan closed her laptop and leaned back, letting her head rest against the leather seat. Through the window, beside her, she could see the lights of a city far below, probably somewhere over Kansas or Missouri by now. The lights formed patterns, constellations of human life, each one representing families, dreams, struggles. She thought about all the people down there who'd been judged unfairly, dismissed because of how they looked or where they came from. She thought about the young girls who'd been told they couldn't be pilots or engineers or CEOs because those weren't appropriate careers. And she thought about her father, who'd believed that the sky was big enough for everyone. Jordan pulled out her phone and opened her email. She drafted a message to her head of operations. Subject: Mandatory Training Initiative. Effective immediately. I want unconscious bias training implemented for all flight crews and ground staff. Partner with an external consultant, someone with real expertise, not just a checkbox exercise. I want this taken seriously. Schedule a meeting for next week to discuss rollout. JM. She hit send, then opened a second email to her head of HR. Subject: Diversity Audit. I want a full audit of our hiring and promotion practices over the past 5 years. I want to know if we're truly walking the walk or just talking the talk. Let's have data, not assumptions. JM. Another send. Jordan set the phone down and looked out the window again. The anger she'd felt earlier had cooled into something more purposeful. This wasn't just about Captain Dalton. It was about building a company, a culture that reflected the values her father had instilled in her. The plane hit a patch of light turbulence, and Jordan felt the gentle sway. She smiled faintly. The sky didn't care what you looked like. It only cared if you respected it. And she respected the hell out of it. 2 hours into the flight, somewhere over the plains of the Midwest, the cabin was quiet except for the steady hum of the engines. Jordan had been working on her laptop for the past 90 minutes, reviewing acquisition proposals, answering emails, preparing notes for a meeting that was scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow at a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan. Skybridge Aviation wasn't just a charter company anymore. Jordan had been quietly positioning the business to enter a new phase, fleet expansion through strategic acquisitions. There were 3 smaller aviation companies on her radar, all struggling financially in the post-pandemic economy. If she could acquire them at the right price, Skybridge would double its reach and establish a foothold in international markets. But the deal she was working on tonight was different. Victoria Harlow, the executive assistant to Gerard Langston, one of the richest tech entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, was supposed to have been on this flight. Gerard was interested in purchasing a 20% equity stake in Skybridge, which would inject $60 million into the company and give Jordan the capital she needed to execute her expansion plan. The catch? Gerard Langston was notoriously particular about who he did business with. He didn't just invest in companies, he invested in people, and he wanted to meet Jordan in person before committing a single dollar. That meeting was scheduled for tomorrow morning, which meant Jordan had to be sharp, rested, and ready to convince a man who'd built a $12 billion empire that she was worth betting on. No pressure. Jordan closed her laptop, and rubbed her eyes. She hadn't slept well in days. The weight of running a company, the constant decisions, the endless problems that needed solving, had a way of following her even into sleep. A soft chime sounded, and Simone appeared from the galley carrying a tray. "Ms. Mitchell," Simone said quietly, "I thought you might like something to eat. We have grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, and a quinoa salad. Or if you prefer, I can prepare something else." Jordan looked up and managed a tired smile. "The salmon sounds perfect. Thank you, Simone." Simone set the tray down on the table in front of Jordan, along with a glass of sparkling water. She hesitated for a moment, then said, "May I ask you something?" "Of course." "Earlier, with Captain Dalton." Simone glanced toward the cockpit, then back at Jordan. "You handled that with a lot of grace. I'm not sure I would have been so calm." Jordan picked up her fork, considering the statement. "I wasn't calm, Simone. I was furious. But I've learned that anger doesn't solve problems. It just makes them louder." Simone nodded slowly. "Still, what he said to you, it wasn't right." "No, it wasn't. But he's not the first person to make that mistake, and he won't be the last. The question is whether he learns from it." "Do you think he will?" Jordan cut into the salmon, the tender flesh flaking apart under her fork. "I think he has the potential to. Time will tell." Simone straightened, smoothing her uniform. "Well, for what it's worth, I'm glad you're on this flight. It's an honor to serve you." Jordan looked up, surprised by the sincerity in Simone's voice. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Simone nodded and returned to the galley, leaving Jordan alone with her meal. As Jordan ate, she thought about the conversation. It was strange sometimes how the smallest interactions could shift perspective. Simone's words had reminded her why she fought so hard to be seen, not just for herself, but for everyone who came after her. Every barrier she broke down, every assumption she challenged, made the path a little easier for the next person. She finished her meal and checked her watch. 1:47 a.m. Eastern Time. They'd be landing at Teterboro in New Jersey in a little under 90 minutes. From there, it was a 20-minute drive into Manhattan. Jordan packed her laptop back into her backpack and pulled out a folder containing printed copies of the financial projections she'd be presenting to Gerard Langston. She reviewed them one more time, her eyes scanning the numbers, looking for weaknesses or gaps in the logic. Everything looked solid. Skybridge was profitable, growing, and positioned for scale. The only question was whether Gerard would see the same potential she did, and whether he'd be willing to bet $60 million on it. Jordan set the folder aside and leaned back, closing her eyes. She let herself drift, the steady hum of the engines lulling her into a light, restless sleep. In the cockpit, Marcus Dalton was silent. Ryan had tried to make small talk twice and gotten one-word responses both times. Now, Ryan just focused on his instruments, occasionally checking the weather radar and fuel consumption. Marcus stared out at the night sky, his mind replaying the conversation with Jordan Mitchell over and over again. Her words had cut deeper than any reprimand from a superior ever had, because they weren't just about him. They were about a pattern, a system that he'd been part of without even realizing it. He thought about the assumptions he'd made, not just tonight, but throughout his career. How many times had he judged someone based on their appearance? How many times had he made snap decisions about who belonged and who didn't, based on nothing more than his own biases? The worst part was that he'd always considered himself fair, open-minded. He'd flown with women pilots, worked with crew members from dozens of different countries, prided himself on being professional. But professionalism wasn't just about doing the job right. It was about treating people right. And tonight, he'd failed. "Captain?" Ryan's voice broke through his thoughts. "Yeah?" We're coming up on our descent point. A TC just cleared us to begin our approach into Teterboro. Marcus nodded, forcing himself to focus. Roger. Let's start the descent checklist. The next 15 minutes were all business, adjusting altitude, configuring the aircraft for landing, coordinating. With air traffic control, Marcus welcomed the structure, the precision required. It gave him something to focus on other than the gnawing shame in his gut. At 3:12 a.m., the Global 7500 touched down smoothly on runway 6 at Teterboro Airport, the tires kissing the asphalt with barely a bump. Marcus guided the aircraft off the runway and onto the taxiway, following the marshalers' lighted wands toward the private terminal. As they rolled to a stop, Marcus shut down the engines and completed the post-flight checklist. The cabin door opened and cool night air flooded the cockpit. Marcus sat there for a moment, staring at the dark tarmac outside. Then he unbuckled and stood. "You coming?" Ryan asked. "In a minute. I need to talk to Ms. Mitchell first." Ryan gave him a sympathetic look. "Good luck, man." Marcus stepped into the cabin. Jordan was already standing, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She was talking quietly with Simone, thanking her for the service. When she saw Marcus, she finished her conversation and turned to face him. "Captain," she said, her tone neutral. "Ms. Mitchell." Marcus took a breath. "I know I already apologized, but I need to say it again. What I did tonight was inexcusable. I let my assumptions cloud my judgment, and I treated you with disrespect. I'm deeply sorry." Jordan studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I appreciate that, Captain. And I meant what I said earlier. I don't want your resignation. But I do expect you to follow through on what we discussed. This company is going to change, and I need people who are willing to change with it." "I am," Marcus said firmly. "I'll do whatever it takes." "Good." Jordan extended her hand. "Then I look forward to working with you." Marcus shook her hand, feeling the firmness of her grip. "Thank you for giving me a second chance." "Don't thank me yet," Jordan said with a faint smile. "Earn it." She walked past him and descended the air stairs, disappearing into the waiting, black SUV that had pulled up beside the aircraft. Marcus stood in the empty cabin, watching the taillights fade into the darkness. Ryan appeared beside him. "That looked like it went okay." "Yeah," Marcus said quietly, "but it's just the beginning." "Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in the story, and share your thoughts in the comments." The SUV carrying Jordan Mitchell merged onto the New Jersey Turnpike, heading south toward the Lincoln Tunnel. The driver, a professional who'd clearly done this route 1,000 times, navigated the sparse early morning traffic with smooth efficiency. Jordan sat in the back seat, her phone buzzing with notifications, emails from her team, updates from operations, a text from her assistant confirming that the meeting with Gerard Langston was still on for 9 a.m. at his Manhattan office. She opened the text and replied, "Confirmed. I'll be there." Then she opened another message, this one from her younger brother Marcus, no relation to the captain. He lived in Atlanta, worked as a software engineer, and had a habit of texting her at odd hours. "Yo, sis, you still in Vegas? I need your advice on something." Jordan smiled and typed back, "Just landed in New York. What's up?" The reply came instantly. "Long story. I'll call you tomorrow, but congrats on whatever big meeting you're about to crush. You always do." Jordan's smile widened. Marcus had always been her biggest cheerleader, even when they were kids, and she'd insisted on beating him at every board game they played. She put the phone down and looked out the window. They were entering the tunnel now, the tiled walls blurring past as the SUV descended into the underground passage connecting New Jersey to Manhattan. Jordan thought about the day ahead, the meeting with Gerard Langston, the pitch she'd rehearsed 100 times, the $60 million that could transform Skybridge from a successful regional company into a national powerhouse. But more than that, she thought about the responsibility she carried, not just to her employees or to her late father's legacy, but to every person who'd been told they didn't belong. She thought about Captain Dalton, standing in that cabin, realizing for the first time how his assumptions had shaped his behavior. She thought about Simone, quietly serving with professionalism and grace. She thought about all the pilots, mechanics, flight attendants, and ground crew who worked for Skybridge, many of whom had their own stories of being underestimated. And she thought about the young black girls who might one day see her story and realize that the sky wasn't just for people who looked a certain way. It was for anyone brave enough to claim it. The SUV emerged from the tunnel into Manhattan, the city lights glittering against the pre-dawn darkness. Skyscrapers rose around them like giants, and the streets, though quieter than during the day, still pulsed with life. Jordan took a deep breath. Tomorrow, she'd walk into Gerard Langston's office. She'd sit across from a billionaire who could either open doors or close them, and she'd make her case. But tonight, right now, in this moment, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She'd stood her ground. She'd turned a moment of humiliation into a teaching opportunity. She'd shown Captain Dalton and herself that power didn't have to come from anger or retribution. Sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was give someone the chance to be better. The SUV pulled up to the entrance of a boutique hotel in Midtown. The driver stepped out and opened Jordan's door. "Thank you," Jordan said, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. "My pleasure, Ms. Mitchell. Good luck with your meeting." Jordan smiled. "I don't need luck, but I appreciate the sentiment." She walked into the hotel, the automatic doors sliding open with a soft hiss. The ice lobby was elegant, understated, marble floors, soft lighting, a faint scent of lavender in the air. Jordan checked in quickly, took the elevator to the 8th floor, and entered her room. It was simple but comfortable. A king-sized bed, a desk, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She dropped her backpack on the desk, kicked off her shoes, and collapsed onto the bed. For a moment she just lay there, staring at the ceiling, letting the weight of the day settle over her. Then she pulled out her phone one last time and opened her Notes app. She typed a single line. "Remember, the fight isn't over when you win. It's over when the next person doesn't have to fight at all." Jordan set the phone on the nightstand, closed her eyes, and let sleep take her. Tomorrow would come soon enough. Morning came too quickly. Jordan woke to the sound of her phone alarm at 6:30 a.m., her body protesting the 4 hours of sleep it had gotten. She silenced the alarm, sat up, and stretched, feeling the stiffness in her shoulders from hunching over her laptop during the flight. Outside, Manhattan was already awake. Horns honked in the distance. The muted roar of traffic filtered up from the street below. Through the window, Jordan could see the city bathed in early morning light, the glass and steel towers reflecting the pale blue sky. She showered quickly, letting the hot water wash away the last remnants of exhaustion. Then she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, wrapped in a towel, and looked at herself. The woman staring back had dark circles under her eyes, but her gaze was steady, determined. Jordan dried off and opened her suitcase. She'd packed a professional outfit before leaving Las Vegas, knowing she'd need it for the meeting. She pulled out a tailored navy blazer, a crisp white blouse, charcoal slacks, and a pair of low-heeled leather shoes. Simple, professional, confident. She dressed carefully, taking her time with each button and zipper. This wasn't just about looking the part. It was about feeling ready. By 7:15, Jordan was sitting at the small desk in her hotel room, her laptop open, reviewing her presentation one last time. The financial projections looked strong. The growth strategy was sound. The risk assessment was thorough. Everything was in place. At 7:45, her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. Car will be outside at 8:15. Gerard's office confirmed the meeting for 9 a.m. You've got this. Jordan smiled and typed back, Thanks. See you on the other side. She closed her laptop, slid it into her bag, and took one last look around the room. Then she grabbed her coat and headed downstairs. The black SUV was waiting outside the hotel entrance when Jordan stepped onto the sidewalk. The driver, a different one from last night, opened the rear door for her. Good morning, Ms. Mitchell. We're heading to 432 Park Avenue, correct? That's right. The drive through Midtown was slow, the streets clogged with morning commuters, delivery trucks, and yellow cabs weaving through traffic like schools of fish. Jordan watched the city pass by outside the window. Coffee shops opening their doors, street vendors setting up their carts, people in business suits hurrying towards subway stations. New York had a rhythm to it, a pulse that never stopped. Jordan had always loved that about the city. It didn't care who you were or where you came from. It just kept moving, relentless and indifferent. At 8:52 a.m., the SUV pulled up in front of 432 Park Avenue, one of the tallest residential towers in the Western Hemisphere. But Gerard Langston didn't live there. He worked there, on the 68th floor, in a private office suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Jordan stepped out of the car, thanked the driver, and walked into the building. The lobby was all white marble and polished chrome, with a security desk staffed by 2 guards in immaculate uniforms. Good morning, Jordan said, approaching the desk. I'm Jordan Mitchell. I have a 9 a.m. appointment with Gerard Langston. One of the guards checked his computer, then nodded. Yes, Ms. Mitchell, you're expected. Take the elevator on the left to the 68th floor. Someone will meet you there. Thank you. Jordan crossed the lobby, her heels clicking softly against the marble. She stepped into the elevator, pressed the button for the 68th floor, and felt the subtle lurch as the car began its ascent. As the numbers climbed on the display, 20, 30, 40, Jordan took a slow breath, centering herself. She'd been in high-pressure situations before, board meetings with investors who doubted her, negotiations with pilots' unions, crises that required split-second decisions. This was just another test, and she'd spent her entire life passing tests. The elevator chimed softly, and the doors slid open. Jordan stepped into a small reception area that was minimalist to the point of being stark. White walls. Bibo's single abstract painting. A low-glass table with a vase of fresh orchids. A woman in her 30s, wearing a sleek black dress, stood waiting. Ms. Mitchell? That's me. I'm Elena, Mr. Langston's executive assistant. He's ready for you. Please follow me. Elena led Jordan down a short hallway and through a set of double doors into an office that took Jordan's breath away. The space was enormous, at least 2,000 square feet, with floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides offering unobstructed views of Manhattan. To the north, Central Park stretched out like a green carpet. To the east, the Chrysler Building gleamed in the morning sun. And to the south, the financial district rose in a jagged skyline of glass and ambition. In the center of the room, behind a sleek glass desk, sat Gerard Langston. He was younger than Jordan had expected, mid-40s, with sandy hair touched with gray at the temples, sharp blue eyes, and the kind of posture that suggested he'd never slouched in his life. He wore a simple black sweater and jeans, the uniform of Silicon Valley billionaires who'd long since stopped needing to prove anything with suits and ties. When he saw Jordan, he stood and smiled. Ms. Mitchell, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. Jordan crossed the room and shook his hand. His grip was firm, but not aggressive. The pleasure is mine, Mr. Langston. Thank you for making the time. Please call me Gerard and have a seat. He gestured to a pair of white leather chairs arranged near the windows. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? Water would be great. Elena appeared with a bottle of sparkling water and a glass, set them on the small table between the chairs, and silently withdrew. Gerard settled into the chair across from Jordan, crossing one leg over the other. "So," he said, his tone conversational, "I've been reading about Skybridge Aviation. Impressive growth trajectory. Your father built something remarkable." "He did," Jordan said, "and I'm working to honor that legacy while taking the company in new directions." "Tell me about those new directions." Jordan opened her bag and pulled out a sleek portfolio containing her presentation materials. She handed Gerard a bound copy. "Over the past 2 years, I've been positioning Skybridge to move beyond regional charter services and into international markets. We've identified 3 acquisition targets, smaller companies that are financially distressed but operationally sound. If we acquire them, we can integrate their routes and aircraft into our fleet, doubling our capacity and establishing a presence in Europe and Asia." Gerard flipped through the presentation, his eyes scanning the numbers. "And you need $60 million to make this happen." "Correct. $40 million for the acquisitions, $10 million for integration costs, and $10 million as a working capital buffer." "What's your expected ROI?" "We're projecting a 22% return within 3 years, with the potential for higher returns if we execute a secondary expansion into cargo services." Gerard looked up from the presentation, his expression unreadable. "Those are optimistic projections." "They're based on conservative assumptions," Jordan said calmly. "The aviation industry is recovering faster than anticipated post-pandemic. Business travel is rebounding, and there's significant demand for private charter services among high-net-worth individuals and corporations. We're positioned to capture that demand." Gerard set the presentation aside and leaned back in his chair, studying Jordan. "Let me be honest with you, Ms. Mitchell. I don't invest in companies. I invest in people. Numbers are important, but they're not the whole story. What I want to know is whether you have the vision, the grit, and the leadership to execute on this plan. Because I've seen plenty of impressive presentations that fell apart the moment things got difficult." Jordan met his gaze without flinching. "I understand. So let me tell you a story." She set her own portfolio aside and leaned forward slightly. "When my father died 4 years ago, I was 28 years old. I had an MBA, but I'd never run a company. The board assumed I'd sell. Some of them quietly suggested I wasn't ready. A few investors pulled out, convinced that Skybridge was about to collapse without my father at the helm." Gerard nodded, listening. "I could have walked away," Jordan continued. "I could have taken the easy path, sold the company, and lived comfortably on the proceeds. But I didn't, because my father taught me that building something meaningful requires more than just intelligence or capital. It requires the willingness to be underestimated and to prove people wrong." "And have you?" Gerard asked. "Every single day." Jordan's voice was steady. "I've grown this company by 35% in 4 years. I've negotiated contracts that people said I couldn't win. I've hired and promoted talent that other companies overlooked. And I've done it all while dealing with people who looked at me and saw someone who didn't belong." Gerard's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something that might have been respect. "Like last night." Jordan paused. "You know about last night." Gerard smiled faintly. "I have friends at Teterboro. Word travels fast in aviation circles. I heard that the owner of Skybridge had an interesting interaction with one of her own pilots." Jordan felt a brief surge of frustration, but kept her voice calm. "What happened last night was unfortunate, but it was also a teaching moment. I could have fired Captain Dalton. Instead, I chose to use the situation to address a larger issue, unconscious bias in the workplace. Because real change doesn't happen through punishment. It happens through education." Gerard was silent for a long moment, his blue eyes fixed on Jordan. Then he said, "That's the answer I was hoping for." Jordan blinked. "I'm sorry." Gerard stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city. "I've met a lot of CEOs, Ms. Mitchell. Most of them are brilliant, driven, and utterly ruthless. They see problems as obstacles to eliminate, not opportunities to grow. But you see the bigger picture. You understand that leadership isn't just about making money. It's about building a culture that lasts." He turned back to face her. "That's why I'm going to invest in Skybridge." Jordan felt her heart skip a beat. "You are?" "$60 million as you requested, in exchange for a 20% equity stake. But I have one condition." "What's that?" Gerard walked back to his chair and sat down. "I want you to implement the diversity and training initiatives you mentioned last night, not just in your aviation operations, but across the entire company. I want Skybridge to become a model for what inclusive leadership looks like in a traditionally exclusive industry. And I want you to document the process because I believe other companies can learn from it." Jordan felt a smile spread across her face. "I was planning to do that anyway." "Then we have a deal." Gerard extended his hand, and Jordan shook it, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her like a mantle. "Thank you," she said. "You won't regret this." "I know I won't," Gerard said, "because I don't invest in companies that I think will fail. I invest in people I believe in, and I believe in you, Ms. Mitchell." An hour later, Jordan stepped out of 432 Park Avenue and onto the sidewalk, her phone already buzzing with texts and emails. Her assistant, her CFO, her head of operations. Everyone wanted to know how the meeting had gone. Jordan texted back a single word, "Done." Then she called her brother. Marcus picked up on the second ring. "Yo, sis, how'd it go?" Jordan couldn't keep the grin out of her voice. "We got the deal." "Yes!" Marcus shouted so loud that Jordan had to hold the phone away from her ear. "I knew you would. I freaking knew it." "Calm down before you hurt yourself," Jordan said, laughing. "Are you kidding? This is huge. $60 million. You're about to take over the world." "Not the world," Jordan said. "Just the skies." They talked for a few more minutes, Marcus peppering her with questions about the meeting, Gerard Langston, and what came next. When they finally hung up, Jordan stood on the corner of Park Avenue and 57th Street, watching the city move around her. She thought about her father, about the small charter company he'd started with one leased jet, about the dream he'd built piece by piece, flight by flight. And she thought about the woman who'd walked onto a plane last night, wearing jeans and carrying a backpack, and been told she didn't belong. That woman had just secured $60 million in funding. That woman was about to change the industry. And that woman was just getting started. 3 weeks later, Jordan Mitchell stood in the main hangar of Skybridge Aviation's headquarters in Henderson, Nevada, watching as 200 employees filed into rows of folding chairs arranged in front of a temporary stage. The hangar was massive, large enough to house 4 aircraft simultaneously, and today it had been transformed into an auditorium. Banners hung from the ceiling with the Skybridge logo. A projection screen displayed the company's mission statement: excellence through innovation, service through integrity. Jordan stood backstage, listening to the murmur of conversation as people settled into their seats. Pilots in their crisp uniforms, mechanics in coveralls, flight attendants, ground crew, operations managers, accountants, HR staff, every single employee, from the newest hire to the most senior captain. Beside her, Marcus Dalton stood in his dress uniform, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked nervous. "You ready for this?" Jordan asked quietly. Marcus took a breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." Jordan studied him. Over the past 3 weeks, Marcus had been working with the HR team to develop the unconscious bias training program that would soon be mandatory for all crew members. He'd read books, attended workshops, had difficult conversations with colleagues, and he'd volunteered to be one of the first people to speak publicly about his experience. Not because Jordan had asked him to, but because he'd wanted to. "You don't have to do this," Jordan said. "I know it's not easy to stand in front of your peers and admit you made a mistake." "I know," Marcus said. "But if I don't, what kind of message does that send? That it's okay to mess up as long as you keep quiet about it? That doesn't help anyone." Jordan nodded. "All right, then let's do this." She stepped out onto the stage, and the room fell silent. 200 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Jordan walked to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and smiled. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here." A murmur of "good morning" rippled through the crowd. "I'm sure many of you are wondering why I called this all-hands meeting," Jordan continued. "Some of you probably assumed it was about layoffs or budget cuts." She paused, letting a ripple of nervous laughter pass through the room. "I'm happy to report that you can relax. This isn't about cuts. It's about growth." The tension in the room eased slightly. 3 weeks ago, Skybridge Aviation secured a $60 million investment from Jared Langston, one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in the country. This investment is going to allow us to expand our fleet, enter new markets, and position ourselves as one of the leading private aviation companies in North America. A few people clapped. Jordan raised a hand. "But before we celebrate, I need to talk to you about something else. Something that happened on a flight from Henderson to New York on the night I met with Gerard Langston." The room went quiet again. Jordan took a breath. "That night I boarded one of our aircraft, the Global 7500, wearing jeans and a backpack. I wasn't dressed like a CEO. I was dressed like someone who'd been working 16-hour days and didn't care about appearances. And when I sat down in the cabin, the captain of that flight made an assumption. He assumed I didn't belong there. He assumed I was trespassing. And he tried to remove me from the aircraft." A shocked murmur ran through the crowd. Several people turned to look at Marcus, who stood at the edge of the stage, his face pale but composed. "That captain," Jordan continued, "is standing right here, and in a moment he's going to tell you what happened in his own words. But before he does, I want to say this. What happened that night was wrong. It was hurtful, and it was a symptom of a much larger problem, not just in our company, but in our industry. The problem of unconscious bias." Jordan's voice grew firmer. "Unconscious bias is when we make snap judgments about people based on their appearance, their race, their gender, their age, or any other factor that has nothing to do with their abilities. It's not always intentional. In fact, most of the time, it's not. But that doesn't make it any less damaging." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Here's the truth. Skybridge Aviation was built on the principle that the sky belongs to everyone. My father believed that, and so do I. But if we're going to live up to that principle, we need to do better. We need to be intentional about challenging our biases, questioning our assumptions, and creating a culture where everyone, regardless of what they look like or where they come from, is treated with respect." Jordan looked out at the sea of faces. "So starting today, Skybridge is launching a comprehensive unconscious bias training program for all employees. This isn't a box-checking exercise. This is a real, sustained effort to change the way we think and work. And it starts with honesty." She stepped back from the podium and gestured toward Marcus. "Captain Dalton." Marcus walked slowly to the podium, his shoulders squared, but his expression humble. He gripped the sides of the podium and looked out at the crowd. "Most of you know me," he began, his voice steady but quiet. "I've been flying for Skybridge for 3 years. Before that, I spent 27 years in commercial and military aviation. I've always prided myself on being professional, fair, someone who followed the rules." He paused, swallowing hard. "But 3 weeks ago, I made a mistake that showed me I wasn't as fair as I thought I was. When Ms. Mitchell boarded the Global 7500, I looked at her and made a snap judgment. I saw a black woman in casual clothes, and I assumed she didn't belong on that aircraft. I didn't ask questions. I didn't check the manifest. I just decided." The room was silent. No one moved. "And when she told me she was on the manifest," Marcus continued, his voice thickening with emotion, "I didn't believe her. I talked down to her. I threatened to have her removed by security. I treated her like she was less than human, all because of assumptions I didn't even realize I was making." Marcus looked directly at Jordan. "Ms. Mitchell had every right to fire me on the spot. Instead, she gave me a chance to learn, to grow, to understand how my biases were affecting the people around me. And over the past 3 weeks, I've been doing that work, reading, listening, and confronting some uncomfortable truths about myself." He turned back to the crowd. "I'm standing here today because I want you to know that this training isn't about pointing fingers or making people feel guilty. It's about recognizing that we all have biases, and we all have blind spots. The question isn't whether we have them. It's what we do about them." Marcus stepped back from the podium, his eyes glistening, but his posture straight. The room was silent for a long moment. Then slowly, someone began to clap, then another and another. Within seconds, the entire room was applauding, not loudly, not enthusiastically, but with a quiet respect that felt more meaningful than any standing ovation. Jordan stepped back to the podium. "Thank you, Captain Dalton. That took courage." Marcus nodded and returned to his place at the side of the stage. Jordan addressed the room again. "Over the next few months, every single one of you will go through this training. It won't be easy. It will challenge you. It will make you uncomfortable. But I believe, I know, that it will make us better. Not just as a company, but as people." She smiled. "Now let's talk about the fun part, the expansion." The mood in the room shifted as Jordan outlined the details of the acquisition plan, the new routes, the new aircraft, the job opportunities that would open up as Skybridge grew. By the time she finished, the energy in the hangar was electric. When the meeting ended, employees filed out, slowly, many stopping to shake Jordan's hand or congratulate Marcus on his honesty. As the crowd thinned, Jordan found herself standing alone in the empty hangar, looking up at the aircraft parked nearby, a sleek Gulfstream G650, its polished exterior gleaming under the fluorescent lights. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Marcus approaching. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, "I just wanted to say thank you for giving me the chance to speak today. It meant a lot." Jordan smiled. "You earned it, Captain. What you did took guts." Marcus nodded. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said that night on the plane, about how bias doesn't require intent. That really stuck with me. Good, because that's the hardest part to accept, that we can hurt people without meaning to." Marcus was quiet for a moment, then said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. How do you do it? How do you keep going when people are constantly underestimating you?" Jordan considered the question. "I think about the people who come after me. Every time I prove someone wrong, I'm making it a little easier for the next person. That's what keeps me going." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's a hell of a legacy. It's the only one that matters." If you were in Jordan's position, dealing with someone who misjudged you so harshly, do you think you could have shown the same level of grace? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your take. That evening, Jordan returned to her office on the second floor of the Skybridge headquarters building. The office was smaller than Gerard Langston's, about 500 square feet, but it had everything she needed. A desk, a wall of bookshelves filled with aviation manuals and business texts, and a window overlooking the tarmac. She sat down at her desk and opened her laptop, pulling up the email she'd been drafting for the past few days. It was addressed to her entire leadership team, her CFO, COO, head of operations, and HR director. Subject: Moving Forward Team. As we begin this new chapter for Skybridge, I want to be clear about our priorities. Yes, we're expanding. Yes, we're growing our fleet and entering new markets. But none of that matters if we lose sight of our core values. Over the next year, I want us to focus on 3 things. 1. Building a culture of inclusion. This means not just training, but meaningful changes in how we hire, promote, and support our employees. 2. Operational excellence. Growth is meaningless if we can't deliver the same level of service that built our reputation. 3. Long-term sustainability. I'm not interested in short-term wins that compromise our future. Every decision we make should be measured against its impact 5, 10, 20 years from now. We have an incredible opportunity ahead of us. Let's make sure we do it right. JM. She hit send, then leaned back in her chair, looking out the window at the darkening sky. A year ago, she'd been fighting, just to keep the company afloat, fielding doubts from investors and board members who thought she wasn't ready. Now, she was about to lead Skybridge into its next phase, bigger, bolder, and built on principles that went beyond profit. Her phone buzzed. A text from Gerard Langston. Saw the news about the all-hands meeting. Well done. This is exactly why I invested in you. Jordan smiled and typed back. Thanks. This is just the beginning. She set the phone down and looked at the framed photo on her desk. A picture of her father standing in front of his first leased Cessna, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. We're doing it, Dad, she said quietly. We're building something that lasts. The office was silent except for the faint hum of the HVAC system. Outside, a Gulfstream taxied slowly across the tarmac, its navigation lights blinking in the twilight. Jordan stood, grabbed her coat, and headed for the door. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new battles to fight. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment of peace, because she'd earned it. 6 months later, Skybridge Aviation had changed. The changes weren't always visible from the outside. The aircraft still gleamed on the tarmac. The pilots still wore their crisp uniforms. The service remained impeccable. But inside the company, a quiet transformation was underway. The unconscious bias training had been rolled out to every employee. Some had embraced it immediately, grateful for the opportunity to examine their own assumptions. Others had been resistant at first, viewing it as unnecessary or worse, as some kind of corporate virtue signaling. But over time, as the training continued and the conversations deepened, even the skeptics began to see the value. Jordan had been intentional about making the training interactive, not preachy. Employees were asked to share their own experiences of being misjudged or overlooked. They participated in role-playing exercises. They watched video testimonials from people in the aviation industry who'd faced discrimination. And they learned to recognize the subtle ways bias could creep into hiring decisions, promotions, and day-to-day interactions. The results were measurable. Employee satisfaction scores had gone up by 18%. Turnover had dropped by nearly a third, and Skybridge had received 3 diversity awards from industry organizations, along with a feature in Aviation Weekly titled, How One CEO is Changing the Culture of Private Aviation. But Jordan didn't care about the awards. She cared about the stories. Like the story of Vanessa Torres, a Latina flight attendant who'd been with Skybridge for 5 years and had always dreamed of becoming a pilot. After completing the bias training, one of the senior captains, who'd previously dismissed the idea of her transitioning to the cockpit, had personally mentored her through the certification process. Vanessa was now a first officer, flying regional routes and working toward her captain's license. Or the story of James Okoro, a Nigerian immigrant who'd been working as a ground crew supervisor. He'd applied for a management position 3 times and been turned down each time, despite his qualifications. After the training, HR conducted an audit of their promotion practices and realized that unconscious bias had played a role in his rejections. James was now the operations manager for the West Coast region, overseeing a team of 40 people. These were the stories that mattered to Jordan, not the headlines or the accolades, but the real, tangible change in people's lives. And it was happening because she'd chosen to turn a moment of humiliation into a teaching opportunity. On a crisp October morning, Jordan stood in the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton in downtown Chicago, waiting for Marcus Dalton to arrive. They'd scheduled a breakfast meeting to discuss the rollout of Phase 2 of the Diversity Initiative, expanding the program to include suppliers, partners, and contractors. Marcus appeared through the revolving doors dressed in civilian clothes, khakis, and a sweater, looking far more relaxed than he had 6 months ago. "Good morning, Ms. Mitchell," he said, shaking her hand. "Marcus, we've been working together for half a year. You can call me Jordan." Marcus smiled. "Old habits die hard, but I'll try." They walked into the hotel restaurant, a sunlit space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Michigan Avenue. The hostess seated them at a corner table, and they ordered coffee and breakfast. As they waited for their food, Marcus pulled out a folder. "I wanted to show you something." He opened the folder and handed Jordan a sheet of paper. It was a letter, handwritten in neat script. "Dear Captain Dalton, I wanted to write to you after hearing your story at the all-hands meeting. I'm a first officer with Skybridge, and I've been flying for 3 years. I'm also a gay man, and I've spent most of my career hiding that part of myself because I was afraid of how people would react. When you stood up and talked about your own biases, it gave me the courage to be honest about mine, about the assumptions I make about people who I think won't accept me. Your honesty made me realize that I've been contributing to the same problem by not trusting people to see me for who I am. I came out to my crew last week, and they were nothing but supportive. I just wanted to thank you for showing me that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's strength." Sincerely, Andrew Chen Jordan read the letter twice, then looked up at Marcus. "Wow." Marcus nodded, his eyes a little damp. "I get letters like this every week now, people telling me how the training changed their perspective, or how it gave them the courage to speak up about their own experiences. It's humbling. You started something important, Marcus. You should be proud. I'm trying to be, but mostly I'm just grateful you gave me, the chance." Their food arrived, eggs. Benedict for Jordan, oatmeal and fruit for Marcus. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then Jordan said, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "The next phase of this initiative needs to go beyond our own company. We need to start influencing the broader industry. I want Skybridge to be a model, but I also want other companies to follow suit." Marcus set down his fork. "How do you propose we do that?" "I'm working on a white paper," Jordan said. "A comprehensive guide to implementing diversity and inclusion programs in aviation companies. I want to share our learnings, what worked, what didn't, the challenges we faced. And I want to make it available for free to any company that wants to use it." Marcus's eyebrows rose. "That's ambitious, but also smart. If you can get other companies to adopt these practices, it raises the bar for the entire industry." "Exactly. And I think there's a market for it. A lot of aviation companies want to improve their diversity metrics, but they don't know where to start. We can give them a roadmap." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I like it, and I'd be happy to contribute to the white paper if you need help." I was hoping you'd say that. Your perspective as someone who went through the training and who facilitated it is invaluable. They spent the next hour discussing the details of the white paper, outlining sections, identifying key data points, and brainstorming ways to make the content accessible and actionable. By the time they finished breakfast, Jordan felt energized. This was the kind of work that mattered, not just building a successful company, but building a better industry. That afternoon, Jordan flew back to Henderson on one of Skybridge's Gulfstreams. As the plane descended toward the Nevada desert, she looked out the window at the sprawling cityscape below. Las Vegas glittered in the sunlight, its casinos and hotels rising out of the sand-like monuments to ambition. But beyond the Strip, the city was vast and varied. Neighborhoods, schools, parks, lives lived far from the neon glow. Jordan thought about all the people down there who'd been told they didn't belong. The kids who dreamed of becoming pilots but didn't see anyone who looked like them in the cockpit. The workers who put in long hours but were passed over for promotions because someone assumed they weren't leadership material. She thought about the responsibility she carried, not just to her employees but to everyone who looked to Skybridge as proof that change was possible. And she thought about her father, who'd believed that the sky was big enough for everyone. When the plane landed, Jordan returned to her office and opened her laptop. She pulled up the draft of the white paper she'd been working on and read through it one more time. Title: Building Inclusive Skies, A Guide to Diversity and Equity in Private Aviation. Introduction: In an industry that has historically been dominated by a narrow demographic, the challenge of building a truly inclusive workplace can seem insurmountable. But it's not. Over the past year, Skybridge Aviation has implemented a comprehensive diversity and inclusion program that has transformed our culture, improved employee satisfaction, and strengthened our business outcomes. This white paper is a guide for other aviation companies who want to follow suit. It's based on real experiences, real challenges, and real successes. Our hope is that by sharing what we've learned, we can help create an industry where everyone, regardless of race, gender, age, or background, has the opportunity to thrive. Jordan smiled. The white paper was still a work in progress, but it was getting there. She spent the next 2 hours refining the language, adding data, and incorporating feedback from her HR director and operations team. By the time she looked up, the sun had set, and the office was dark except for the glow of her laptop screen. Jordan saved her work, closed the laptop, and stood up, stretching. She walked to the window and looked out at the tarmac, where several aircraft were parked, their shapes silhouetted against the night sky. This was her world. These planes. This company. This mission. And she wasn't done yet. If you've ever felt like someone judged you before they even knew you, drop a comment and tell me about it. I want to hear your stories. They matter. 2 weeks later, Jordan received an email that made her pause. It was from the president of the National Aviation Association, one of the largest industry organizations in the country. Subject: Speaking Invitation. Dear Ms. Mitchell, we've been following the work Skybridge Aviation has been doing in the area of diversity and inclusion, and we're incredibly impressed. Your company is setting a new standard for what's possible in private aviation. We would like to invite you to be the keynote speaker at our annual conference in March. The theme this year is The Future of Flight, and we believe your insights on building inclusive workplaces would be a perfect fit. The conference will be held in Dallas and will attract over 3,000 industry professionals, including CEOs, senior executives, pilots, and policymakers. We think this would be an excellent platform for you to share Skybridge's story and inspire other companies to take similar steps. Please let us know if you're interested. We'd be honored to have you. Best regards, David Chen, President, National Aviation Association. Jordan read the email 3 times, her mind racing. A keynote speech at the largest aviation conference in the country. in front of 3,000 people. This was an opportunity to amplify the message on a national stage, to take what Skybridge had learned and share it with the entire industry. Jordan hit reply and typed, "David, thank you for the invitation. I would be honored to speak at the conference. Let's discuss the details. Best, Jordan Mitchell." She hit send, then leaned back in her chair, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Public speaking had never been her favorite thing. She preferred small meetings, one-on-one conversations, the kind of interactions where she could read the room and adjust her approach in real time. But this was different. This was about more than her comfort zone. This was about changing the industry. Jordan picked up her phone and called her brother. "Yo, sis, what's up? I just got invited to speak at the National Aviation Association conference." Marcus let out a low whistle. "That's huge. Are you doing it?" "I already said yes." "Hell yeah. You're going to crush it." Jordan smiled. "I hope so, but I'm going to need to practice a lot." "You'll be fine. Just be yourself. Tell them the truth. That's all you ever need to do." Jordan closed her eyes, letting her brother's confidence wash over her. "Thanks, Marcus. I needed that." "Anytime, sis. Anytime." They talked for a few more minutes, then hung up. Jordan set the phone down and looked at the calendar on her wall. The conference was 4 months away. That gave her time to prepare, to refine her message, to make sure she was ready. But even as she started planning, part of her wondered, was the industry really ready to hear what she had to say? Only one way to find out. March arrived cold and clear in Dallas, Texas. The National Aviation Association Conference was held at the K. Bailey Hutchison Convention Center, a sprawling complex in the heart of downtown. By the time Jordan arrived on the first day of the conference, the building was already buzzing with activity. Thousands of aviation professionals moving through the halls, attending workshops, browsing vendor booths, and networking over coffee. Jordan had flown in the night before and spent the evening in her hotel room rehearsing her keynote speech. She'd written and rewritten it a dozen times, refining every sentence, every transition, every pause. The speech was 25 minutes long, and she knew it by heart. But knowing the words and delivering them with impact were two different things. Now, standing backstage in the main ballroom, Jordan could hear the murmur of the crowd on the other side of the curtain. The ballroom seated 3,500 people, and according to the event coordinator, it was at capacity. Jordan took a slow breath, trying to calm the nervous energy thrumming through her chest. "You okay?" asked Sarah, Jordan's assistant, who'd flown to Dallas with her. "I'm fine," Jordan said, though her hands were slightly clammy. "Just processing. You're going to be amazing. I've heard that speech 100 times, and it still gives me goosebumps." Jordan managed a smile. "Thanks. I hope the audience feels the same way." The event coordinator appeared, holding a clipboard. "Ms. Mitchell, we're ready for you. You'll be introduced in 2 minutes." Jordan nodded. "Got it." Sarah squeezed her arm. "Go change the world." Jordan walked to the edge of the stage, hidden behind the heavy velvet curtain. She could hear David Chen, the president of the association, addressing the crowd. "And it's my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. Jordan Mitchell is the CEO of Skybridge Aviation, a company that has not only achieved impressive growth over the past year, but has also become a leader in diversity and inclusion within the aviation industry. Her story is one of resilience, vision, and the courage to challenge the status quo. Please join me in welcoming Jordan Mitchell." The applause was loud, filling the ballroom like a wave. Jordan stepped out onto the stage. The lights were bright, much brighter than she'd expected, and it took her eyes a moment to adjust. When they did, she saw the sea of faces stretching out before her. Thousands of people, sitting in rows that seemed to go on forever. Jordan walked to the podium, set her notes down, and looked out at the audience. For a moment, she didn't speak. She just stood there, letting the silence settle, letting the weight of the moment sink in. Then she smiled. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady. "Thank you for that warm welcome. And thank you to David and the National Aviation Association for inviting me to speak today." The audience settled into quiet attention. Jordan glanced down at her notes, then looked back up. "I want to start by telling you a story." She paused. "Last year, I boarded one of my own planes, a Bombardier Global 7500, wearing jeans and a backpack. I was exhausted. I'd been working 16-hour days, and I didn't care about looking polished. I just needed to get to New York for a meeting that could change the future of my company." The room was silent. When I sat down in the cabin, the captain of that flight looked at me and made a decision. He decided I didn't belong there. He assumed I was trespassing, and he tried to remove me from the aircraft. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. The captain didn't know that I was the owner of the plane. He didn't know that I was the CEO of Skybridge Aviation. He didn't know anything about me except what he saw, a black woman in casual clothes. And based on that, he made a judgment. Jordan's voice grew firmer. "Now I could stand here today and tell you that story as a tale of triumph. How I put the captain in his place, how I proved him wrong, how justice was served. And in a way, that's what happened. But the real story is more complicated. Because what happened on that plane wasn't just about one captain making one mistake. It was about a system, a culture that allows bias to flourish, often without us even realizing it." She stepped away from the podium, moving to the front of the stage. Unconscious bias is a term we hear a lot these days. But what does it actually mean? It means that all of us, every single person in this room, carry assumptions and stereotypes that influence how we see the world. And those assumptions don't require intent. They're shaped by our upbringing, our experiences, the media we consume, the culture we live in. Jordan looked out at the audience. The captain who tried to remove me from that plane wasn't a bad person. He was a highly skilled pilot with 3 decades of experience. But in that moment, his biases clouded his judgment. He saw someone who didn't fit his mental image of what a CEO looks like, and he acted on that assumption. She paused, letting the words settle. "So here's the question I want to ask you today. How many opportunities have we missed, as an industry, as companies, as individuals, because we made assumptions about people based on how they look, where they come from, or what we think they're capable of?" The silence in the room was profound. At Skybridge Aviation, we decided to answer that question honestly. And what we found was uncomfortable. We found that our hiring practices, our promotion decisions, even our day-to-day interactions were shaped by unconscious bias in ways we hadn't recognized. So we made a choice. We chose to do something about it. Jordan walked back to the podium. Over the past year, we've implemented a comprehensive diversity and inclusion program. We've trained every single employee on unconscious bias. We've audited our hiring and promotion practices. We've created mentorship opportunities for underrepresented groups, and we've measured the results. She clicked a button on the podium, and a slide appeared on the screen behind her, showing a series of charts and graphs. Employee satisfaction is up 18%. Turnover is down 32%. We've promoted more women and people of color to leadership positions in the past year than in the previous 5 years combined. And our financial performance? It's the strongest it's ever been. Jordan looked at the audience. Diversity isn't just the right thing to do. It's good business. When we build teams that reflect the diversity of the world we live in, we make better decisions. We innovate more. We serve our customers better. And we create a culture where people actually want to work. She paused, then smiled. But it's not easy. Change never is. Some of our employees were skeptical at first. Some thought the training was unnecessary or too politically correct. But over time, as people engaged with the material and shared their own stories, something shifted. We started having real conversations about bias, about privilege, about the barriers that exist for people who don't fit the traditional mold. Jordan's voice softened. And the captain who tried to remove me from that plane? He's still with the company. In fact, he's one of our strongest advocates for the diversity program. Because I gave him a second chance. Not because I'm particularly forgiving, but because I believe that people can grow if we give them the opportunity. The audience was rapt, hanging on every word. So here's my challenge to you, Jordan said, her voice rising with conviction. Don't wait for a crisis to start addressing bias in your organization. Don't wait until someone sues you or until you lose a talented employee because they didn't feel valued. Start now. Have the hard conversations. Invest in training. Audit your practices. And be willing to admit when you've made mistakes. She stepped forward again, her eyes scanning the crowd. Because here's the truth. The aviation industry has a diversity problem. We all know it. 80% of pilots are white men. Women make up less than 6% of airline pilots. People of color are vastly underrepresented in leadership positions. And if we don't change that, we're not just failing the people we've excluded. We're failing the industry itself. Jordan's voice dropped to a quieter, more intimate tone. I love aviation. I grew up in hangars. I learned to read flight plans before I learned algebra. My father built Skybridge from the ground up, and when he passed away, I had the honor and the burden of carrying that legacy forward. But I don't want to build a company that's successful for only a select few. I want to build a company that opens doors for everyone. The applause started small, a few scattered claps, and then it grew, building into a standing ovation that filled the ballroom. Jordan stood at the podium, her heart pounding, as 3,000 people rose to their feet. She hadn't expected this. She'd expected polite applause, maybe a few nods of agreement. But this was something different. This was validation. This was momentum. This was the beginning of something bigger. When the applause finally died down and people returned to their seats, Jordan smiled. Thank you. That means more than you know. And before I close, I want to leave you with one final thought. She looked out at the audience. The sky doesn't care what you look like. It doesn't care where you came from or what challenges you've faced. It only cares if you respect it. And if we, as an industry, can learn to see people the way the sky sees them, we'll build something truly extraordinary. Jordan stepped back from the podium. Thank you. The applause erupted again, even louder this time. Jordan waved, then walked off the stage, her legs shaking slightly from the adrenaline. Sarah was waiting backstage, her eyes wet with tears. Jordan, that was incredible. Jordan exhaled, feeling the tension drain from her body. I think it went okay. Okay? That was one of the best speeches I've ever heard. Jordan smiled, exhausted but exhilarated. Let's see if anyone actually does anything with it. But even as she said the words, she knew something had shifted. She could feel it in the energy of the room, in the way people had responded. This wasn't just a speech. It was a spark. And sparks had a way of starting fires. Over the next 2 days, Jordan attended workshops, networked with other executives, and participated in panel discussions. But everywhere she went, people stopped her to talk about the keynote. CEOs wanted to know how Skybridge had implemented the diversity program. HR directors asked for copies of the training materials. Pilots shared their own stories of being overlooked or underestimated. And perhaps most surprising, several competitors, companies that had long viewed Skybridge as a rival, reached out to ask if Jordan would be willing to consult with them on building their own diversity initiatives. On the last day of the conference, Jordan sat in a quiet corner of the convention center cafe, sipping coffee and checking her email. One message caught her eye. It was from the editor-in-chief of Aviation Today, one of the most widely read industry publications. Subject: Feature Story Proposal. Dear Ms. Mitchell, your keynote speech at the NAA conference was nothing short of transformative. I've been covering this industry for 20 years, and I've never seen a standing ovation like that. We'd like to feature you and Skybridge Aviation in an upcoming issue. The story would focus on your diversity initiatives, the challenges you've faced, and the impact it's had on your company. We'd also like to include interviews with your employees, the people whose lives have been changed by this work. Would you be interested? Best, Lisa Tran, Editor-in-Chief, Aviation Today. Jordan read the email twice, then typed a reply. Lisa, I'd be honored. Let's make it happen. Best Jordan. She hit send, then closed her laptop and looked around the cafe. Nearby, a group of young aviation students, college-age, diverse, full of energy, were discussing the conference panels they'd attended. One of them, a young black woman with her hair in braids, was talking animatedly about Jordan's keynote. She said, "The sky doesn't care what you look like." That hit me so hard. Her friend, a young man with a South Asian accent, nodded. Same. I've been thinking about applying to flight school, but I always felt like I wouldn't fit in. Hearing her talk made me feel like maybe I could. Jordan felt a lump rise in her throat. She stood, walked over to the table, and cleared her throat. "Excuse me," she said. "I couldn't help but overhear. I'm Jordan Mitchell." The students looked up, their eyes widening. "Oh my God," the young woman said. "You're the keynote speaker." Jordan smiled. "I am. And I just wanted to say, if you're thinking about applying to flight school, you absolutely should. The industry needs people like you." The young woman blinked, clearly overwhelmed. "Thank you. That means everything." Jordan handed her a business card. "If you ever need advice or support, reach out. I mean it." The students thanked her profusely, and Jordan walked away, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. This was why she did the work. Not for the awards or the accolades, but for moments like this, when someone who'd felt invisible suddenly felt seen. 1 year after that night on the tarmac in Nevada, Jordan Mitchell stood in the same hangar where she'd addressed her employees for the first time. But this time, the hangar looked different. The walls were lined with banners celebrating Skybridge's achievements over the past year. Best Private Aviation Company, National Aviation Awards, Top Employer for Diversity, Industry Excellence Awards, Fastest Growing Charter Service, Business Aviation Magazine. And parked in the center of the hangar, gleaming under the overhead lights, was a brand new Gulfstream G700, the newest addition to Skybridge's fleet, purchased with the capital from Gerard Langston's investment. The entire company had gathered for the unveiling ceremony. Pilots, flight attendants, mechanics, operations staff, HR, accounting, everyone. Nearly 300 people filled the space, their faces reflecting the pride of a team that had worked hard and succeeded together. Jordan stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd. She saw Marcus Dalton in the front row, his uniform crisp, his expression one of quiet respect. Beside him sat Vanessa Torres, the flight attendant who'd become a first officer. And in the back, she spotted James Okoro, the operations manager who'd been overlooked for years before finally getting the recognition he deserved. These were her people. This was her team. Jordan tapped the microphone. "Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here." The room quieted. "A year ago," Jordan began, "I stood in this hangar and told you that we were going to change, that we were going to build a company that reflected our values, not just in words, but in actions. And I'll be honest, I wasn't sure how it would go. Change is hard. It requires people to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and the systems they're part of. And I know that not everyone, was convinced it was necessary. She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. But you showed up. You engaged. You asked hard questions. You shared your stories. And you proved that change is possible when people are willing to do the work. Jordan clicked a button and a slide appeared on the screen behind her. It showed a series of statistics. Employee satisfaction, plus 23% from previous year. Turnover rate, minus 37% diversity in leadership positions, plus 45% revenue growth, plus 28%. These numbers tell a story, Jordan said, but they're not the whole story. The real story is in the lives that have been changed, the opportunities that have been created, the culture we've built together. She gestured to Vanessa. Vanessa Torres joined Skybridge 5 years ago as a flight attendant. Today, she's a first officer, and she's on track to become a captain within the next 2 years. The room erupted in applause. Vanessa smiled, her eyes glistening. Jordan continued. James Okoro spent years working as a ground crew supervisor, applying for promotions and being turned down. Today, he's the operations manager for our West Coast region, and his team just had their most successful quarter on record. More applause. And Captain Marcus Dalton. Jordan looked at Marcus, who straightened slightly in his seat. Made a mistake a year ago, a big one. But instead of hiding from it, he owned it. He did the work to understand his biases. And today, he's one of the strongest advocates for our diversity program, mentoring new pilots and helping to build a culture where everyone feels valued. The applause was quieter this time, more respectful, but no less meaningful. Jordan stepped away from the podium. This past year has taught me something important, that leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about being willing to grow. It's about creating space for others to grow. And it's about building something that lasts. She gestured to the Gulfstream G700 behind her. This aircraft represents our future. It's a symbol of how far we've come and how far we're going to go. But it's not just a plane. It's a reminder that when we invest in people, when we create opportunities, challenge assumptions, and build a culture of respect, we don't just succeed as a company, we succeed as a community. Jordan's voice softened. My father used to say that the sky doesn't care what you look like. It only cares if you respect it. And I believe that's true. But I also believe that we, as people, have a responsibility to see each other the way the sky sees us, with clarity, without prejudice, and with the understanding that everyone has the potential to soar. The room was silent, the weight of the moment settling over everyone like a blanket. Jordan smiled. So thank you. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for doing the work. And thank you for proving that when we come together, there's nothing we can't accomplish. The applause started slowly, then built into a roar. People stood, clapping, some wiping tears from their eyes. Jordan stood at the podium, her heart full, watching as her team celebrated not just the company's success, but the journey they'd all been on together. When the applause finally died down, Jordan raised her hand. One more thing before we wrap up. I want to share some exciting news. The room quieted again, curious. As many of you know, we published a white paper earlier this year about implementing diversity initiatives in aviation companies. We made it available for free, hoping that other companies might find it useful. Jordan clicked another button and a new slide appeared. Since we published that paper, it's been downloaded over 50,000 times. We've received requests from aviation companies in 12 countries asking for consulting support. And just last week, I was invited to testify before a congressional committee on diversity in the aviation industry. Gasps and murmurs of excitement rippled through the crowd. What we've built here at Skybridge isn't just changing our company, Jordan said, her voice rising with emotion. It's changing the industry, and that's because of you. Every single one of you." The applause erupted again, louder than before. Jordan waited for it to subside, then said, "All right, enough talking. Let's celebrate." The ceremony ended, and people moved toward the refreshment tables that had been set up along the side of the hangar. Music played softly over the speakers. Laughter and conversation filled the air. Jordan mingled with her employees, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, listening to stories. She felt lighter than she had in months, the weight of the past year lifting as she saw the tangible results of the work they'd done together. At one point, Marcus approached her, holding a glass of sparkling cider. "Ms. Mitchell, Jordan," he corrected himself with a smile. "I just wanted to say thank you. Again. For everything." Jordan clinked her glass against his. "You've earned it, Marcus. You did the work. That's all anyone can ask." "Still," Marcus said, "you could have ended my career that night. But you chose to believe I could be better. That's something I'll never forget." Jordan looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "We all deserve a second chance, Marcus. The question is whether we use it." Marcus nodded. "I'm trying. I know you are, and it shows." They stood there for a moment, two people who'd started as adversaries and ended as allies, united by a shared commitment to doing better. Later that evening, after the celebration had ended and the hangar had emptied, Jordan stood alone beside the Gulfstream G700, running her hand along the smooth fuselage. The aircraft was magnificent, sleek, powerful, a marvel of engineering. Oh, but to Jordan, it was more than just a plane. It was a testament to what was possible when you refused to accept the limitations others tried to place on you. Her phone buzzed. A text from Gerard Langston. Saw the photos from the unveiling. "Congratulations. You've built something extraordinary." Jordan typed back, "We're just getting started." She pocketed the phone and looked up at the tail of the aircraft, where the Skybridge logo gleamed under the lights. A year ago, she'd been fighting just to be seen, just to be respected, just to be recognized as someone who belonged. Now she was leading a company that was changing the industry, inspiring others, creating opportunities for people who'd been told they didn't belong. And she'd done it by refusing to let one moment of humiliation define her. Jordan walked toward the exit, turning off the lights as she went. The hangar plunged into darkness, except for the faint glow of the runway lights outside. As she stepped into the cool night air, Jordan looked up at the sky. It was clear, the stars brilliant against the blackness. The sky didn't care what you looked like, and neither should anyone else. Epilogue. 2 years later, Skybridge Aviation had expanded to 25 aircraft and operated routes across 3 continents. Jordan Mitchell was featured on the cover of Forbes under the headline, "The CEO Who Changed Aviation." Captain Marcus Dalton was still flying for the company, now serving as the Chief Diversity Officer, overseeing training programs that had been adopted by dozens of other aviation companies. Vanessa Torres earned her captain's license and became the first Latina woman to command a Gulfstream G700 for Skybridge. And James Okoro was promoted to Vice President of Operations, overseeing the entire Skybridge fleet. But the most important change wasn't measured in revenue or fleet size. It was measured in the stories of the people who'd been given a chance, the pilots who'd been overlooked, the mechanics who'd been underestimated, the young people who looked at Skybridge and saw proof that the sky really was big enough for everyone. And it all started with a woman in a denim jacket and a backpack, boarding a plane that she happened to own, and choosing to turn a moment of humiliation into a movement for change. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to let someone else's assumptions define you. And sometimes the best way to prove you belong is to build something so undeniable that the world has no choice but to take notice. And that, right there, is why you should never underestimate someone based on how they look. Jordan Mitchell walked onto that plane as someone the captain dismissed without a second thought, but she left it as the person who changed his life and the entire industry for the better. So here's my question for you. Have you ever been in a situation where someone judged you unfairly? Or maybe you've been the one making the assumptions. Either way, I want to hear about it. Drop your story in the comments below, because these conversations matter. And if this story moved you, if it made you think or feel or see the world a little differently, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Justice Stories, because we've got so many more stories like this one coming your way. Stories about people who refused to back down. People who stood up for what was right. People who changed the world one decision at a time. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And thank you for being part of this community. Until next time, stay humble, stay strong, and remember, the sky belongs to everyone.